before we started to develop the framework plans, we analyzed the neighborhood first from a regional perspective. And this diagram here sort of shows really simply how, both by observing land use, zoning, and then talking to people on the street, talking to community leaders, we identified Camp Washington as part of this industrial core of Cincinnati. So for comparison's sake, we show the central business district and the uptown employment area as sort of similar economic zones of a different type. So we have an industrial, commercial, and institutional employment and economic zone. From there, we looked, sort of zoomed in the scope and looked specifically at the neighborhood itself and identified how this industry feeds into the community that's there around it. So what we actually observed is that there are these interesting pockets of residential, and then there are these pockets of commercial and business districts. First, it's along Hopple Street, is this auto-oriented district that's actually really high-grossing businesses there. There's gas stations, drive-through things that actually make some of the most money of any of the businesses in the neighborhood. From there, we have sort of struggling neighborhood business districts along Colerain on either side of that. So as we observed these things, as we started to form the framework plan, our focus areas were actually on where these zones sort of meet, where these zones start to, in some places there are very well-defined boundaries between these. For example, all of a sudden you'll have a street, the other side will be industry, the other side will be housing. In some places they intertwine really interestingly. So what we did is we focused on these areas and how we can make an intervention in those areas to take the success that the industry sees and help spread that to the other communities. So the goal was to create the sort of synergy between industry, residential, and business districts, both economically, socially, as well as physically through our interventions.
And one of the things I focused on mainly was signage, gateways, and streetscape. Right now, within Camp Washington, the neighborhood sort of lacks an identity. There is currently an existing sign that kind of welcomes people into the neighborhood, but from what I heard from our community stakeholders, is that the sign was actually donated by a company that manufactures tombstones for like Spring Grove Cemetery. So the sign is actually a modified tombstone, and one of the ways in which people know that they're in the neighborhood is probably through some of the local neighborhood institutions, such as Camp Washington Chili. And part of the proposal with the signage, gateways, and the streetscape was to kind of link the residential clusters as well as the two, as well as the main neighborhood business district, which includes the Hopple Street business district as well as the Colerain Avenue business district. Sort of respect the unexpected. It's hard to anticipate what kind of development would come into the neighborhood, but also create a successful mix of commercial, residential, retail, and light industry, utilizing not only the auto-oriented Hopple Street business district, but also the more pedestrian-oriented Colerain Avenue business district. So the example that I pulled was from the Short North neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio, which kind of was a successful example of establishing gateways and sort of welcoming people into the neighborhood and making it known that this is the Short North. I proposed a series of archways for the neighborhood that were inspired by the design of the Western Hills Viaduct, which is a major arterial for the community, but it's also architecturally distinct. So the proposals I came up with for the signage included a banner, wayfinding sign, and a gateway sign, and to show you sort of what the elevations are existing, as well as the proposed. On Hopple Street, I proposed a planted median to run along the street, sort of as a way of slowing down the traffic throughout the neighborhood, making it more pedestrian friendly, because as it is right now, Hopple Street is kind of somewhat of a hazard to pedestrians.
So Camp Washington has a lot of potential to become a more environmentally friendly neighborhood. Someone in another project last year made a diagram of all the impermeable surfaces in Camp Washington, and it looked like it was solid 3/4 of the neighborhood. I thought it was really interesting. If you actually look on Google Earth, satellite photos of the city, it's like downtown over the Rhine, Camp Washington, or like solid gray and a field of green. So we have a very large amount of services. And beyond that, Camp Washington is really, in large part, a commuter neighborhood. We have about 1,800 residents and something like 5,000 jobs. And the housing stock has really diminished. So people are driving from, a lot of people from Kentucky even, to come work in this neighborhood when they could be living here. There's a lot of vacant lots, and there's a lot of land and space that'd be great for housing the workforce. And so it'd be more pedestrian friendly, cut down on emissions, cut down on impervious surfaces. And so that brought me into my proposal for infill housing. You can see the diagram here. This is where we are now. Lots of cars, lots of pollution. This is where I'd like us to be. So this is a little hard to see from a distance, but I identified all the parcels that are currently being lived on, all the residential parcels. And you can see there's two strong clusters here on either side of the Hopple interchange. And then they're also scattered throughout the neighborhood. And these two purple zones here are what is zoned for residential use. And you can see it's quite a tiny amount. And since that designation, a lot of this housing is deteriorated and then demolished, or is just sitting vacant because it can't be used for residential purposes, and lots are too small or inappropriate for industrial uses. So what I proposed is these orange sites here be used for housing. And this diagram here shows what that could potentially look like. The darker lots are smaller and would be more limited, more strict in what they could be. They'd be row houses, multifamily, but just smaller lots. And the larger lots getting more, less defined, because they could be large apartment buildings, detached multifamily, a block of row houses. Some of these lots are very, very large. So what I would propose is to do it in phases. Redevelop first in these two primary pockets of residential, which show a pretty strong community. They're pleasant little neighborhoods. And then to expand out from there and hit first here, so you created this area of housing, and then hit the bottom of the neighborhood. And I've highlighted some sites here to show you what that looks like. Some of the smaller sites, ones that are almost entire blocks, and here's sort of a half-hearted little park right there that could be used for something much better. So, but for building types, we would need permeable pavements, green roofs wherever possible. If you can't do a green roof, rain barrels to capture and store some of the rainwater until it stopped raining. And really, I want to keep the character of the neighborhood the same with dense, walkable urbanism. This is not going to be a suburban neighborhood. There's going to be no lawns. There should not be on-site parking. And the floor area ratio really, more than 2 to 1. And
so I looked at transportation, and I also focused on the Cons Brownfield